Thanks, Laura. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. This is Amy Mack filling in for Megachar, and we wanted to spend this hour really having a discussion about what we've been learning and experiencing and how we've been growing through leadership and practice and all of our work with the wonderful coaches and teachers and leaders at NextJump. So really quickly, we're going to introduce ourselves for those of you who haven't met us or known us or heard from us before. We'll then give you an overview of how we're going to spend the time. And then we'll jump into our stories and encourage questions and interaction throughout the way. We'll probably talk over each other and interrupt each other a bunch of times, and that's going to be cool too. So really quickly, Mackie, do you want to introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know you?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. It's an honor to fill in for Megachar and take over the reins for a week, give them a much needed and deserved week off. So just one quick introduction. My name's Coach Mackey. I run a youth nonprofit basketball organization in New York City, serving boys and girls age 4 to 18. We serve over 2,500 kids a year. And we're a basketball organization, but what kind of made me gravitate to Megan and Charlie in the first place and kind of got me working with them is we are a basketball program, but we treat leadership development as a equal part of the program. So it's about 50% basketball, 50% leadership development. I'll get more into the specifics of my program. And I look forward to sharing with you guys how my relationship with Megan and Charlie as mentors has really changed my life personally and changed the way I run my organization just in so many influential ways. So I look forward to sharing my leadership journey. Amy, I'm going to have you go first because I've been preparing for it, and I know myself, and I don't want to cut into your time. And next thing I know, I went for 50 minutes and people got to jump off. So I want to let you go first because I just don't trust myself to finish in an appropriate amount of time, if that makes sense.
All right, that's totally fine. Self-knowledge is one of the most important forms of knowledge, right? So for everyone that I haven't had the opportunity or the pleasure to interact with, my name is Amy Philbrook. I use she and her pronouns, and I lead a sales division at Fidelity Investments. I've been working in the financial and asset management industry my entire career, about 26 years. And really excited about doing work in that part of the in that part of business, because I feel like financial security is one of the keys to physical health, emotional health, joy, and security. There's nothing more important in life than being able to take care of yourself and those that you love, and money is fuel for doing that. So while it can be an industry that's viewed through a little bit of a jaded lens, I choose to view it for the lens that money is fuel to take care of yourself and those who you love. And I am proud to work for a company that tries to provide access to solutions to help more people achieve more of what they're looking for in life. I'm going to share my leadership journey, but before I do that, let me tell you actually why I think Mackie and I were asked to take over this class together. I have been working very closely with Charlie and Megan and with Coach Mackie and Brent and some others on this call in our leadership think tank for pretty much the last year. That wasn't my introduction to NextJump. This was a new phase in my relationship with them. But long story short, a couple of weeks ago, I had what I would call a classic meltdown, or crashed myself into the wall on my leadership journey, and exhibited some pretty poor judgment in my behavior, both with my peers in the group and with Megan and Charlie. And I think if this isn't a lesson about how Megan and Charlie operate and what leadership growth means to them, I don't know what is. In recovering from that crash into the wall, they encouraged me to use peers in my group like Mackie, and they asked me to solidify my learnings from that painful episode by taking the opportunity to share that story and teach what I've learned. So if you're wondering why were Amy and Coach Mackie asked to do this, Coach Mackie really helped me recover from that pretty bad spin out or crash. And this is an opportunity for me, and I think for Coach, to share what did we learn from going through this experience in this episode. Mackie, anything you would add to that?
The only thing I would add is I think you were also asked, and I think I was also asked because you were really kind of flying with the wall and flying with some of the lessons that you've learned recently. And, we're here to talk about what this class is all about, leadership in practice, taking the lessons that they provide for us on a weekly basis and actioning them. The way I like to think about it is learning the material is about 50% of the work, but 0% of the payoff. Whereas actioning it is equally hard as learning it, but that's where you get 100% of the payoff. So I think they identified the two of us as recently displaying signs that we've been actioning what we're learning, and kind of talking about the difference between what they call as that armchair professor, where you're a student of leadership versus someone who's putting leadership into practice. And I think that's what we'll both be talking about today.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to share in a minute a very rough drawing of the journey that I've been on over the last year when it comes to my leadership practice and the highs and lows, and then a look at some of my top takeaways and frankly, what are still some of my biggest questions. But before we do that, I want to ask everybody, I'm looking at the chat and I see that Ruth mentioned getting in the arena. And the Teddy Roosevelt quote and Brene Brown really anchors a lot of her stuff on that. I want to be with people who are in the arena. I think, Mackie, that's what you're talking about when you say taking the learnings, but then really putting them into action. I'm going to ask everybody to close their eyes for just 30 seconds. And I want you to, this will help you understand where I'm at on my journey. First, I want you to visualize, maybe you're Russell Crowe, maybe you're the female version of Russell Crowe, but you've got your armor on and you're kind of swaggering in that arena as a gladiator with the shield and the sword that you need to really slay dragons and come out the victor. That's not where I am. So if you've got the dust and the mud and the blood on you, but you've got the sword and you feel victorious, the flip side of that is another place that Brene Brown talks about, which is being in the swamp. And Megan sent me a note the other night as we were corresponding, and she said, I think you're learning some really important lessons, but you're getting stuck in the swamp. So if you close your eyes again and you see that Spanish moss hanging from the trees and you smell that really pungent smell of things rotting and growing, and it's dark and your feet are stuck in the mud and you don't know where you're going, that's a little bit where I've been the last couple of days. So yes, I'm in the arena, but sometimes being in the arena feels more like being in the swamp. Thanks for playing along with that with me. So let me just go ahead and quickly share a visual of what my journey looks like. Coach, because I can't see everybody, can you tell me if you can see my screen? Yep. Okay, great. So I'm not going to watch the chat at this point. I'm going to ask my partner, Coach Mackie, to do that, and he's going to pop in with any comments or questions that he feels are relevant or that he's seeing in the chat. But let me orient you to what you're seeing here. My journey with Next Jump is all the way on the left-hand side of the screen. It started in 2017. I met an amazing guy who works at Next Jump as their COO, Greg Kunkel. He worked across the river from me. I'm in Boston, he's in Cambridge. And we met because our companies share business together, and some friends of mine who worked in a different part of Fidelity were doing a visit for a culture tour. They told me it would be a fun way to spend my afternoon. I hopped on the T, I went across the river. And I fell down the Next Jump rabbit hole. I ended up going to multiple leadership academies, spending lots of time with Greg. And what you can see I listed here is I learned a lot of tactics about coaching, about development, about feedback that I was quick to action. So going back to Mackie's point about why are we here today, I do think I'm somebody who takes an idea and tries it pretty quickly. Doesn't always work, but doesn't stop me from trying. And I took these things, and if you look at it above the line, all I did was accelerate my performance. Straight up, very smooth sailing for the next 3 years. And when I was asked, how are you doing so well? I moved into our Chief Diversity Officer role. I created some amazing programs with measurable results. I scored a new job that I moved into this past spring, leading a big sales division. And when people asked me, what is it that's helping you do so well? I always went back to Greg and Next Jump and the things that I learned in the Leadership Academy and these tactics that I would employ that made me different and that helped me really do things at a pace and at a scale and with quality that other people were struggling to get to. So that's all well and good. I got the call in March or April saying, hey, Megan and Charlie, we're starting this small group workshop, and would I be interested in being in it? And I thought, yeah, if I can get more of that, my journey can continue to go up, and hey, maybe I'll be running the company someday. You can see from the rest of this page, that's not exactly how this experience has played out for me. So I'm embarrassed to admit that my ego gets in the way pretty consistently of learning the things that I need to learn. And my first stop on this journey here, was, sorry about that, was resisting pretty much everything I heard in these small group workshops, and resisting it out loud, really politely, but still pretty consistently pushing back, because how could this be right? How could what they're telling me about vulnerability, about optimism in the future, about what failure really means, and how people get it wrong when they say failure is good or fail faster. How could this all be right when it goes against everything I've ever been taught and everything I've put into practice that have worked for me? That frustration and resistance in what I was learning from Megan and Charlie, coupled with me starting to get frustrated because my new boss and my new job was questioning a lot of what I was doing. And I thought, well, wait a minute, aren't I here because I'm different? Didn't you hire me because I think differently? So how, what is happening? Why am I being questioned? I thought I was being brought here to bring new and different ideas to the table. And I got a question from Charlie that stopped me in my tracks. He said, why are you so fragile? I think he actually had an expletive in there. He said, we thought you were a badass because you'd take all of our stuff and you'd use it and you'd have success. And now you're getting a little bit of feedback and you're all of a sudden you're falling apart and you're getting frustrated and you're questioning whether or not you made the right move and took the right job. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, who am I to feel like I have earned the right to not be questioned on how I'm doing what I'm doing? Yes, I have a track record of success, but I'm still a baby when it comes to learning and growing as a leader. I've never worked in this part of the business before. How could I have suspended my curiosity and replaced it with judgment and frustration? And so that was my first indication that my ego was going to be a real problem for me to have continued success. The good news is I recovered from that low point. I replaced the judgment with curiosity. I started seeing my relationship with my boss improve. And at the same time, Megan and Charlie started teaching something tactical. They started talking about the power of the small group and the teams of 2 or the teams of 4. And I thought, oh, this feels like 2017 again. This is a tactic that I can immediately implement. And I turned around, I actioned that with my team. We started breaking our performers by performance level into small groups, and we started seeing sales results go up. Another learning for me was, I struggle when the learning is about myself and my orientation to the world, and I excel when it's something tactical that's easy to action with others. And it was the first indication I had that if I can externalize something, I can get comfortable with it a lot more quickly than if it's about me and I have to internalize it.
So that's interesting, Amy. That kind of goes in. I just want to share, John from Boston wrote, resisting challenging ideas feels pretty natural. Is that how you learn, or does it really stand in the way of your learning? And I was kind of holding off to share that question with you, but that kind of fits right into what you're describing as when it's work related, you're moving quickly. When it's personal, you're resisting. So maybe a good time to kind of talk about that dynamic of, time and place matters, but when resisting and probing is important versus when it's important to just kind of go with the flow and take lessons and implement quickly.
Yeah, and I think 2 things I've learned there really have only solidified for me in the last 3 or 4 weeks. One of them is being a challenger for the sake of being a challenger is not value added. We give a lot of kudos in a traditional corporate environment for those who are brave, right? We talk about courageous conversations, provocative questions, but challenging for the sake of challenging really is kind of useless and a distraction. And There are times when I feel like I can challenge and ask questions to get to a better idea, create the friction that's going to lead to a better outcome. And there are other times when I challenge just to challenge. And starting to refine my judgment on that is something that I need to work on. So, do I have the answer for folks listening today about how do you refine your judgment? I think you just keep practicing. The second thing is, if I'm going to challenge others, I better be willing to challenge myself more, and I better be open to being challenged more and put myself in the position to be challenged more on the things that I believe to be true, because boy, is it hard to crack your evidence-based beliefs. And the more people who can challenge me on things that I feel I know to be true, the more I can crack those truths open and make room for more learning and more growth. And nothing is harder than that for me, especially when it comes to things like diversity and inclusion, gender politics. I think I have an open mind, and then I find that I run into these really solidified evidence-based truths that are limiting me from being the leader in that space that I want to be. All right, let me move on with the story.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
A couple of those, ahas helped me drive up my results at work. And what happened, I immediately went back to challenging what I was learning from Next Jump. And this time it got a little bit closer to home and a little bit more personal. So I have always professed that I'm a born optimist. I have always been told if you tell people they're winning, even when they're not winning, they'll win more. And I have always believed that love is the most powerful force on the planet. Now, I still believe that, but I found myself really resenting that a lot of the time that we spend together in leadership and practice and in our small group workshop and the leadership think tank is really processing the tough stuff, the hard stuff, the stressful stuff, the dark stuff. And it was around this time in our small group that Megan and Charlie said, we want you all to have a big idea, a huge North Star goal that you're working towards. And we're going to help you accelerate towards that goal faster than you ever think you could get there. And I kept coming up empty. I kept coming up with no big idea. And instead of owning that and exploring why I wasn't inspired and motivated, I decided to start pushing back again against the teaching and pushing back against spending all of this time processing the stuff that didn't feel like love and light and joy. And Charlie and Megan really called me out for my blind spot. And they talked about the fact that, yeah, you've had a lot of success through positivity and optimism, but only working on one side of the equation doesn't make you a whole person and doesn't get you even halfway to your true potential. What are you hiding from? Why are you so afraid to go dark? And I couldn't answer that question. And in true fashion, I decided to pour out every excuse in the book in what I thought was a well-justified dissertation on why I was right. One of my good friends in the group, Brent, who's on today, he was on the receiving end of that dissertation from Amy that probably took me an hour to write and I was super proud of. And he came back and was like, nice list of excuses. What the hell is wrong with you? Grow up, is basically what he said. I mean, he kicked my ass on that. And it was another one of those low points for me where I was like, how am I not seeing myself clearly? Here is my ego again, getting in my way and preventing me from owning my shit. So Brent, thank you for that response. I took that response from Brent and I shared it not only with Megan and Charlie and my peers in my Next Jump workshop, but I shared it with all of my employees who work for me, because I wanted them to see this is what a work in progress looks like. This is how the fire of leadership burns you. And this is what really good friends and peer coaches do for each other. And it felt like a turning point that coincided with another tactic that Megan and Charlie were teaching. But I'm going to pause here before I go into that and see if Coach has anything to add.
Yeah, it's actually a perfect timing for Mike's question, which is because you just briefly mentioned that you started working on what you're learning with the people that you work with. And he was asking, can you talk about what you are sensing as impact on others you are working with? Are they more open, more transparent? So, we have the luxury of being in these small group workshops. We have the luxury of working with Megan and Charlie. one of the things that I experience with explaining all this time I'm putting into the leadership think tank and all these lessons I'm learning is very often it falls on deaf ears, where they don't have the privilege of spending the hours and hours and hours and getting the expertise and being in the small group. And when you try to share it, how some people get it and some people say, wow, that's fantastic, that makes perfect sense. And some people give me this like, you're talking about next jump again. What are you doing over there? I think Megan and Charlie joke about it. This isn't a cult. There's a red button on the bottom of the screen. You can just click it and leave anytime. But I know personally, I often get the feeling from my friends and family that they look at me like I've joined a cult. So I think it's a good time for you to talk about how the people around you, friends, coworkers, how are they reacting to the new Amy and some of the lessons you're learning yourself and trying to teach to other people so quickly?
I would say there's a range of reactions that fall on three places. I would say with my employees, they're shocked at my level of transparency and vulnerability. So I share everything with them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, the last part of this story, which was 2 weeks ago, is that I spent a Saturday afternoon in Home Depot. Any of you outside the US who don't know what Home Depot is, think of a big building construction supply site. Standing there with my husband, picking out electrical sockets and in tears emotionally over my last 24 hours of interactions with my Next Jump teachers. And, you know, people say to me, why would you put yourself through something like that? Why are you doing this to yourself? How much more could you possibly want to grow? How much more success could you want to achieve? This is insane. When I shared with my team on the Monday and they said, how was your weekend? And I said, I spent all weekend crying because I was ashamed of my behavior and I saw a passive aggressive side of me that I hated. But now I'm starting to get excited about working that and fixing it. They were like, why is our leader telling us she was falling apart and crying in Home Depot? Doesn't that make you worry that we won't have confidence in you as a leader? I say, no, that's your choice to have confidence in me or not. Like, I'm going to show you who I really am. And, you know, in turn, maybe you'll show me who you really are. And then we can actually get down to business and do what we're here to do. So some people find it shocking. Some people question my sanity. And then the closest friends that I have, they say, Amy, this is you. Like, you always think you're not good enough. We don't know where that comes from. We think you're great, but you think you're not good enough. And if this is the way that you think you can start to close that hole and get better, and it's working for you, then do it. We've got your back. How do we support you?
Very cool.
All right. So the Home Depot crying thing, that was super embarrassing, but let me skip to the end of that story and just tell you what came from it. Charlie and Megan introduced this practice of working on the walls. I know that if you're in LIP class and you've been in it for a while, you've probably been thinking about this, maybe actioning it. When they gave that to us, it was like my gift from heaven. Thank you. Another tactical thing that I can finally do. I ran out that weekend. I got a new desk to put in the center of my office. I bought the big 3M Post-it flip charts. I bought the markers. And since then, I have been working on my walls for probably the last 5 or 6 weeks. I am surrounded on all sides here by charts that you can't see because I'm in a client-facing business, and this is the background that is on my video screen, but everything else around me is charts. I work on them probably now 70% of my day is up at the flip charts. I find myself in the middle of the night coming up to my office and scribbling things on my walls when I'm inspired. And it was game changing for me to work on the walls. It's all of a sudden the clarity around my work, my goals, my people, and myself and my own issues are staring me in the face. And so again, grabbed onto the walls, did my memory lane of mistakes, identified my red arrow behaviors, which I've shared with all of you here below. And once again, my results at work ticked up. And once again, my ego got in the way.
Sorry to cut you off about the RABs. It is a little blurry on my screen. I imagine anyone with a smaller screen probably can't read your red arrow behavior. So maybe if you want to share them and read them, because I can read everything else. I can't read the RABs.
Conflict avoidance. I wonder how many of you share that RAB with me. Threatened by expertise. If I'm in an area where I'm not the expert and other people are, I tend to turn into that challenger mode for no good reason. My biggest one, excuse making. I find that I very quickly externalize and play the victim. Again, I recommended at the beginning of the call, Doc Rivers' playbook segment on Netflix. His biggest lesson was never play the victim. And I make excuses and play the victim all the time. And then prioritization or shiny objects. I want to work on everything. There's nothing that I'm not curious about. So how do you say no so that you can commit to a double yes? Those are my red arrow behaviors. Is anybody out there feeling me on those? Yeah, I can see some thumbs up and some hands. So those are the red arrow behaviors, Mackie. And I'm going to end this leadership journey because this is a lot of talking about, a very short period of time. But let me just say, I'm crying in Home Depot. I had brought my friends and family into the experience I was having with you all and with Megan and Charlie. I had my daughter observe one of our small group classes. I had some of my best friends get some very generous coaching from Megan and Charlie. And those people who I care about and who have always jived with my values and my ideas, they started questioning me like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And instead of defending what I knew was good, all the good that Megan and Charlie and this work pours into the world, I started backtracking on my evidence-based beliefs. And I started questioning and challenging again in a way that was wholly inappropriate. And the biggest aha I had, and what I'm working on today, is my say-do gap. I say I want to be open to changing and learning. I say I want to be tough enough and brave enough to go through the fire of transformation. I say I want to be completely transparent about the good, the bad, and everything in between. But my actions, this reverting back to challenger mode, this letting my ego drive my responses, it's creating that alignment gap between what I say I want, what I think I want, and how I actually treat people and how I show up in the world. And so right now on my wall in front of me, I have a flip chart that is devoted to my say-do gap. I have all the things that I espouse to be what I want to have for myself and how I want to be in the world. And every day I'm just tracking little things I'm saying, doing, and thinking, and whether they align with that or whether they don't. And I'm tracking these micro movements to try to close that gap. So that's where I'm at on my journey right now. I feel like my journey really, 26 years in business, operating at a very high level at one of the most impactful companies in the US. And I'm still just a baby in this sport of leadership and trying to learn everything that I can. I'll turn it over to you, Mackie, but I'll just end with.
Well, you can end. We have a couple people asking. You mentioned memory lane as part of your wall, and we had more than one person, Karen and Ali, asking for you to go a little deeper into your memory lane and explain what that's about.
So I got this idea from Charlie. I created a chart that says Amy's memory lanes of mistake across the top. And I went all the way back to 2017 when I left my close relationship with NextJump, having taken all these great things that were working for me. And I just started making a list. Everything I have done wrong since then in my professional career. Everything I could think of. And man, I remember I took a picture of it and sent it to Brent, and he was like, please tell me this isn't just the last couple of weeks, because there's a lot of mistakes on this list. It started flowing. I wrote down everything. People I treated badly, opinions I ignored, signals I missed, decisions I made that went wrong, things I didn't own up to. And when I stepped back from that on my wall, I highlighted the themes. And those themes distilled into my red arrow behaviors: conflict avoidance, threatened by expertise, making excuses, and distracted by shiny objects. That was the memory lane of mistakes exercise.
And then one question from Rebecca is, she wants more detail on the toxic mistake that you recently made that led you to crying at Home Depot. A lot of the conversation has been centered around that. So we're asking for a little more clarity on that situation.
So remember, I was a chief diversity officer for 3 years for this big global company. My mission, one of my missions in life, is to make sure that women achieve equality in all aspects of life. And the arena that I can work on that in with the most impact is the corporate arena and the world of business. So I spend a lot of my time working with, advocating for, and promoting gender equality at work. And I had some pretty fixed evidence-based beliefs that the way that people show up in public and the way that they talk when they're at the front of the room and the podium matters. And I know that in this forum before, the way that Megan and Charlie show up has been questioned, because it may appear from the outside looking in that one of them holds a lot more of the power and the other one isn't being given equal airtime, i.e. Charlie does most of the talking instead of Megan. I knew from spending all of this time with them that the relationship and the power dynamics in their relationship work for them and work in a way that does nothing but promote gender equality and women, and that they are both rock stars equally in their own right. But when my friends and family were exposed to that dynamic, and frankly had only a view from the bleachers, right, the cheap seats, and they saw that I am spending all of this time and learning from these people that appear on the surface to show up in a way that I have always coached and advocated against, it really rocked me. And instead of owning that and going to Megan and Charlie and telling them, I'm struggling to reconcile the fact that you show up to others in a way that doesn't align with how I tell others they need to show up, and help me deal with that and help me work through it on my own, I called them out on it. I reverted back to my challenging behavior and I called them out on it. And I didn't even own it when I called them out on it. I blamed it on, hey, I'm getting these questions from others, and so you better deal with this because you're going to keep getting questioned on it. Instead of doing what I should have done and said, this is causing a schism for me. It's breaking one of these evidence-based truths. And I haven't been strong enough to turn around and defend it and own the fact that my belief system is changing thanks to working with the two of you. That's what happened. That's why I was incredibly ashamed of my behavior. And that was the big shining light on, wow, Amy, you say you want to do the tough stuff of changing, but when you're pushed by people close to you that you care about, you're not standing up for your newfound baby giraffe-like beliefs.
Great, thanks for the clarity on it. I think it's, to me, what stands out is how fragile learning is, how subtle learning is, changing old habits and replacing them with new knowledge. It's easy to do in the short term, but when you're challenged is when, you know, you kind of find out what you're made of. And it's, I think it's something I've heard Charlie and Megan say all the time, is a lot of what we're learning, it doesn't matter so much in the good times. It's when things get tough that your bibs matter, your disciplines matter, your rituals matter, your no line hiding faking matter. When it's smooth sailing, it feels like you don't need everything we're learning in this class.
That's right.
It's when you're crying in Home Depot that you kind of need everything you've learned, and that's when, if you have the right setup in place, you can come back stronger than ever.
So I'm only going to share two more things and then turn the time over to Mackie. One thing I'll share is, clearly I was trying to skate past sharing that with all of you right here, right now. So thank you to whoever in the chat called out that question and wanted to know more. And thank you to Mackie for stopping me and having me share it. I'm still ashamed, like I still feel cringy right now about that episode. I probably will for a while. It's probably part of why I'm in the swamp still, but I'm also really proud of the fact that I'm here and I'm talking about it. The second thing I'll share is, you know, I had sent this draft to Charlie and Megan before today, and on the top questions here, Megan really sent me, she sent me a note back that really stopped me. It was just last night or the night before. And she said, the questions aren't lining up with the progress that you're making. Like, why aren't you feeling better about this? Why are you still stuck in the swamp? So this morning I went back and I read these questions, and you can see these three big red arrows. They go right back to my key red arrow behavior, which is excuse making. You know, this is harder. I do feel less happy working on my leadership at this level than I did those years where I just took the easy stuff, applied them to my work, and had a lot of success. But that's an excuse, like, oh my God, it got harder. Well, shouldn't it get harder? Isn't that what we sign up for? As Doc Rivers would say, the job of a leader is to move forward anyway. I stress about like, well, what am I going to lose as I change? Not everybody likes the new Amy Mackey. Not everybody at work likes the new Amy. Not everybody in my house likes the new Amy. Yeah, I'm going to lose some stuff if I change. But again, fretting about that is making an excuse not to keep moving forward. And then lastly, I really don't want to have a big job. I want to have a big life. But when the arena that I'm practicing in is the arena of work, I can get pulled very out of balance. Again, is being out of balance a bad thing? Not necessarily. Maybe it's just an excuse. So even this morning, I was able to step back and say, what am I learning? How am I growing? Just between last night and today, when I knew I had to talk about this, I can see where my red arrow behavior of excuse making is showing up.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. What pops into my head is you talk about how hard change is, but what I think is like, what's the alternative to hard change is no change. And I think about that diagram that they share with the plant that just doesn't grow. And month after month, year after year, it's the same size, the same everything. That's what a dying plant looks like. So this, yes, change is so hard and so painful, but isn't the alternative of going through the rest of your life not changing even worse is what comes into my mind.
Yeah. So I'm going to gladly hand over the mic to you. I will take over moderating the chat. But what I will tell you all is I do a lot of public speaking, and I think I'm pretty authentic and vulnerable. So I had no nerves really going into this today, but man, is my heart racing right now. So thank you for getting me to even another level of honesty and authenticity in front of, a group that I don't know. All right, Mackie, over to you.
All right, thanks, Amy. Yeah, one of the many things I've learned, I've used this a bunch of times in my public speaking, whether it's in COA or live in front of a lot of people, is to start with an on my mind and just declaring that, yes, I am nervous. And my experience is just declaring your nervousness out loud will kind of ease that tension. The other thing I'm trying to push, Megan and Charlie aren't here today, but I'm trying to kind of spiritually push my nervousness onto them. I have a board member from Steady Buckets who's a West Point graduate. He always tells me that the test of a true leader is how your people perform when you're not around. So I'm trying to think that this is actually more of a test of Charlie and Megan's competency than my own. If I fail miserably, it's on them. This is really their test, not me and Amy.
Wow, Mackie.
But Amy so far knocked it out the park. So you made Charlie and Megan look fantastic. And now it's my job to pick up where you left off. So I'll share my screen here. And let's share my journey. All right. Can we see that, everyone? I think so. Thumbs up if you can see it.
All I see is a line with dots. All of your boxes disappeared for me.
Well, I'm animating here. So
you're animating. Okay, cool.
Cool. So I met Charlie and Megan in 2018. I mentioned I run a youth nonprofit organization called Steady Buckets, and the program, quite frankly, was thriving. I had founded the organization in 2010 with literally 0 players, and by the time I met them, we had well over 2,000 players participating. We had just finished our most successful summer camp. I got a phone call from an employee at Next Jump who told me that they were looking for a basketball coach for their kids. And I said, I really don't have time for this. And she was very persistent and kind of I had been teaching at her daughter's school, and she kind of convinced me to please come and just meet with them and see what was going on in their office. So at the time, I was kind of skeptical of taking on more work, but I thankfully said yes to take a meeting. And I walked into the office at Next Jump and I said, I've never seen a place like this. Their whole philosophy was on the wall, right? If you've ever been to the Next Jump office, you've done the culture tour, and I said, this is a place like nothing I've ever been around. I was hearing people having conversations in a style that I wasn't used to, and I was immediately fascinated by what was going on. At the same time, the biggest challenge at Steady Buckets, where the flaw that I had identified was, yes, we were growing substantially year after year in terms of our player population, but our most talented players were leaving. Early in my coaching career, I had the opportunity to work with players who are now in the NBA, countless Division I players, and the Steady Buckets in the early days, we had a very small player population, but many of them were going on to play college basketball. As the program was growing, our strongest players were leaving. And it was clear to me that we weren't meeting their needs anymore. And that failure really fell on my failure to develop our coaching staff. In the organization's early days, I was a one-man show. We had a small number of players, and I was able to coach everyone equally. As our player population grew, my energy was getting pushed in different directions, and quite frankly, it was falling on the lowest performing players. The highest performing players were then being ignored, and I was challenged with finding a way to accommodate both the program's continued growth while also maintaining a higher quality. What really made sense to me was, sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but what really made sense to me was I was failing to develop my coaches. And that was kind of one of the first learnings that I had working with Megan and Charlie, was that my strength was coaching children. My weakness was coaching adults and young adults, and the different dynamic. What I've come to learn is I will give the 10-year-old the hard truth. I will be brutally honest with your 8-year-old. And when it comes to a 25 or a 27-year-old, I walk on eggshells, I treat them with kids' gloves, and I very often prevent them from growing as rapidly as I help young people grow, because I'm terrified of pointing out their weaknesses. So that's something that I've recently come to learn, and that's kind of my biggest challenge. And quite frankly, my organization's continued growth and success depends on that, because we're now too big for me to coach everyone. And if the quality of my people doesn't grow, it doesn't matter how strong of a coach I am, we can't continue to offer the quality programming that we want to offer to 2,000, turns to 3,000, turns to 5,000. Before COVID, we had 5 gyms operating. And quite frankly, there was a level of quality that differed based on which coaches were in the gym. My goal is to not have people say Coach Mackey's fantastic, but for them to say every Steady Bucket coach is fantastic and the program's fantastic. And who's Coach Mackey? I've heard of him, I've never met him, and yet I'm fully committed to the program. So,
hey, Mackey,
yes.
Just a quick question. A lot of people on this call are in coaching roles. Have you figured out yet, now that you know that this is your gap that you need to work on, do you know what the difference is for you between coaching young adults versus coaching young children?
Yeah, what I've recently identified is what I alluded to a little bit, is just brutal honesty. You know, the no line hiding, faking. And anyone who's been in this LIP class, Charlie, and it started to play around with developmental GPS, is start with your bibs and your no line hiding, faking. And like I said, I'm brutally honest with young players, and I'll say things like, if you don't fix your jump shot, or if you don't get faster, or if you don't jump higher, or if you don't get stronger, if you don't work harder, if you don't become more coachable or more disciplined, you will not succeed your goals as a basketball player. You won't be able to play in college. You won't play in the pros. You might not make your high school team. And if you do, you'll sit the bench. I have no problem telling that to a 10-year-old. Yet when I see similar problems with my coaching staff, I have a hard time expressing the same urgency in, if you don't show up to work on time and you don't communicate clearly with your boss, whether it's me or someone else later in your life, you will fail as an adult. And that, I think, has been something that I'm working on, but to be more brutally honest and to the point that if you don't grow and improve and work on your weaknesses, failure is in your cards. Success doesn't just come easy.
Christy had a good comment. She said, kids are so much more resilient. They'll accept the honesty, whereas adults, we've learned how to cover our weaknesses, so we don't want to hear it. We push back.
That's right. And I think that's a big part of that. And we pick up on that. I also think, because maybe subconsciously, but as adults, we recognize how resilient kids are. And we are harder on them than we are on adults. It's funny. I always think about, if you watch NBA games, NBA coaches almost never yell at NBA players. college coaches yell at their players all the time. High school coaches yell at their players all the time. And 8-year-old coaches, the volunteer assistant coach who is coaching their 8-year-old son or daughter will just berate kids. Now, that's a bigger discussion of the appropriateness of that coaching style, but it is telling that the more advanced players don't get yelled at the same way, and they can't necessarily take it the same way. So I think there is a resiliency that we very often know, but we don't acknowledge, and it does affect the way we communicate with kids and adults. I think, think about all the parents in the room, how brutally honest you'll be with your kids, and then your employees who might be not much older, you'll have much more patience for, or maybe not even patience, but you'll treat it differently in terms of delivering your message. So that's definitely something I'm working on. So anyways, back to my journey. Around this same time, I was already on the right path. I had identified my solution before meeting Charlie and Megan, and that was there was a leadership problem in our organization, both from the coaching staff and, more importantly, from the players. I had identified over my coaching career, which I had the opportunity to coach great players such as Kyle Anderson, Donovan Mitchell, Eric Paschall, all playing in the NBA right now, countless players in Division I. I asked myself, what was the difference between the best players I coached and the players that didn't make it to that highest level? No doubt talent was evident in the most successful players, but really what stood out was leadership. They were more coachable. They communicated more honestly with their teammates and coaches. And I had identified, what can I do for my strongest players that other programs can't do, and specifically what my young coaching staff can't do. Ball handling and shooting drills was something that my coaching staff was capable of, but I decided to put a lot of my energy into developing leadership within our community. I feel strongly that the best teams have a leader from the outside, the coach, but also that leadership comes from within the player population. I always think about my college team that I played on at the University of Rochester. We had a strong leader in our head coach, but we had fantastic leadership within the locker room. And I decided that I wanted to start this AYBL, which our strongest players would be invited to be young leaders. They would be tasked with reffing and coaching the younger kids in our program. And I saw this as a solution to both give the strongest players what I thought they needed most, while also developing leadership within our player population that would trickle down to the 2,000 and growing number of younger players who needed more leadership. So moving on, AYBL, we call it the All Youth Basketball League. It just isn't working. Parents are questioning, why am I doing this? Coaches, the young leaders and the younger coaches aren't buying into my vision. I'm getting a lot of questions, the classic, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I had parents say things like, it's so much better when you and some of the other adult coaches run the program. Why are you taking this step back and letting 12-year-olds take a leadership role? When I realized that in my leadership training, I was teaching leadership theory and not how to action leadership. I was essentially dragging the horse to water, but struggling to make the horse drink. What I've learned since is the key is to make the horse thirsty. We'll get into that a little later. But teaching leadership, I was failing at. Forcing people into leadership roles, I was failing at. And I really needed to help them see what leadership was all about, and find the data points that could make them thirsty and make them want to be the best leaders they can be, and take pride in knowing that they were responsible for the quality of our program, that it wasn't my program, that it was our program. So early in 2019, that's right, almost 2 years ago now, more than 2 years ago now. I kind of think I was letting the learning begin. I had now been around Next Jump for a little while. Charlie and Megan had been watching me interact with their children. They had kind of been paying attention to some of the things I was doing. They had given me a little bit of their time, but not really taken me on as a mentee yet. At this point, they invited me into their office. They gave us office space as a way to kind of give me more exposure to Next Jump, and they invited me to their leadership academies. I very quickly was just completely turned on by this new way of thinking. The first lesson that really hit me hard was the importance of honest feedback, and specifically the difference between feedback coming from the coach and coming from peer leadership. It fell into the ideas that I was already playing with, but I had no idea how to action these ideas. Watching how Next Jump gave rapid feedback during their 10Xs and leadership academies, I started experimenting, and I was turning my basketball gym into a feedback laboratory. A couple stories of how we implemented feedback at Steady Buckets is we would do something at the end of every practice. There might be 100 kids in the gym, but they were working in 10 groups of 10. And at the end of every practice, you would circle up with your small group, and I would ask the kids 3 questions in which they had to immediately point to one player in their group. The first question was, who was the hardest worker? 1, 2, 3, point. And everyone had to point to the person in their group that they had identified as the hardest worker. The explanation was, if everyone points to somebody different, it means the whole group was either working really hard or not working hard enough. And you probably know where you fall into it as a group. If everybody points to the same person, it's clear who the hardest worker is. And everybody else should come back next time and try to model that behavior and see if they can outwork that player. Outwork them is our program's mantra, has been since the beginning of our program. But this was a way to bring to life this idea of outwork them. It wasn't so easy that not everyone gets to outwork them. If the whole group points to you, you outwork them. Number 2 was more controversial. Who is the silliest player? I got some negative feedback from parents on that. There were some kids crying because everyone in their group point to them as the silliest player. But the idea was, if you're the silliest player, you are distracting the group. You might think that you're being funny, but the people in your group don't appreciate it. This wasn't coming from the coaches. This was coming from the peers. And number 3 was straight out of the Next Jump playbook as well. It was, who is the most helpful teammate? Who is the best teammate? Similar to the Next Jump Avengers Award. Who is the teammate that helped you succeed the most? 1, 2, 3, point.
Hey, Coach.
Yep.
I got to interrupt you here and ask a question, which is, you started off by saying your biggest gap was coaching the coaches, the adults. So did any of this stuff, these experiments in the leadership lab, did they work with your coaches and the adults that you were coaching as well?
So I'll get to that on one of the next points. Yes, I was experimenting with the adults as well, but not nearly as rapidly. It was at this point, I hadn't identified that as a weakness.
Okay.
It was a blind spot that I was very quickly able to translate what I was learning into how I was teaching my players, but not how I was teaching my coaches. That's more of a recent realization that I'm excited to implement. But at this point, over 2 years ago, no, most of my learnings was going into my personal style of coaching and how I was encouraging 10 and 12-year-olds to action leadership versus encouraging my coaching staff to action this new form of leadership.
10 and 12-year-olds are a lot less scary than adults.
Yes, in many ways, even though for some people, I guess not so much, but for me, definitely. So anyways, 1, 2, 3, point. Some people were against it. They thought I had been called out as a bully. Somebody once wrote me an email saying their kid was loving the program until their child was pointed at for being silly, at which point they were crying and never wanted to come back. And they said that they never expected the leader of the organization to be the bully in the room. So that was tough to take, but I also saw it working. I also saw players that for years I was trying to get to act less silly immediately change their attitude. And I would always respond calmly and respectfully when people questioned the new methodology, but I was firm in seeing the value and sticking to this new style of peer coaching and encouraging people to be more honest and more upfront with what they saw as positive attitudes and harmful attitudes to the community. Another story I want to share falls into the Bring to Light, LBR, Bring to Light, Take a Break and Revisit. Similarly, at a shooting clinic, we did a drill where one player would shoot and you would have a partner rebounding for you, but the shooter would identify their biggest weakness. So the shooter would say, I know my elbow is supposed to be in like this. I'm not sure if you can all see me, but it sticks out like this. All right. So if Amy's my partner, every time I shot the ball, she didn't care if it went in. She either said yes if my elbow was in or no if my elbow was out. So every time she would shoot, it was just no, 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 maybe a yes every once in a while, but mostly no's. Players have a really hard time changing their shooting form, even when they know what they're doing is wrong. The flaw was self-identified, and yet players can't fix what they're doing wrong because they're so focused on making the shot versus trying to, what I call, make the technique.
That feels very familiar, Mackie. It's why I keep making the mistake over and over again.
All right. So very, very much like Brent was your coach and said, what are you doing? I had the players say yes or no based on the style of their shot. And then after about 10 minutes, I tweaked it to say, now I want you to say yes, as in like, yes, when they do it right. But when they do it wrong, I want you to like, no, 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 yell at each other. A very aggressive style of yell at each other. Not no, but no, with some anger. So I remember a kid named Rory who just couldn't get his elbow in. His partner was screaming, no, 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 until finally he took the ball and threw it at his partner's stomach, knocked the wind out of him. We have two, I think they're both 11 or 12 years old, two kids crying in the gym. And so I talked to them, I calmed them down. They take a little break, get a drink of water. And when they start doing the drill again, that elbow was in. So I thought it was, I'll never forget that story as how painful it is to get the truth. But when you get it, you might cry, you might flip out, you might have a violent moment, you might need a little time to cool off, but that painful experience is how lessons really sink in. And I've had experiences with kids where I've literally told them the exact same thing hundreds of times. They'll fix it for a second and then they will forget. And it's this constant, it's what I call running in place. You're working hard, but you're not going anywhere. You're taking one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back. But the painful experience of getting the truth from a peer, that gut punch that knocks the wind out of you literally, is what leads to learning that's more permanent.
So Mackie, I want to hit you with a couple of things that have popped up in the chat. And I also want to be cognizant. You thought you were going to take all my time and I took all of yours. We're at the hour. And so some people are dropping off.
Yeah.
First of all, really quickly, what does LBR stand for?
Yeah, so LBR is light, break, revisit. So bring to light, that's the difficult truth that we so often avoid. The break is maybe going and working out or getting a drink of water, having lunch, sleeping on it. Truth is really difficult to take, and needing that break is important, but then revisiting it. Very often we give people the truth, and because it's so painful, we take a break, but then we don't revisit it. And those are the 3 steps to receiving hard feedback that proves to be effective.
Okay, great. And then an emotional element, is pain always involved in change? Does it have to be painful to motivate us to change?
That's a good question. I don't think it has to be, but unfortunately, I think very often it is. And I think if it was easy, we would all be giant oak trees, right? It's like if growth was easy, then we would all be growing nonstop. I think mostly we avoid growth because it's so painful. I think about shin splints, kids growing up, literally their bone, the feeling of your bones growing is so painful. And I think emotional growth and mental growth is no different. It is so challenging that it hurts. I think it's almost a red flag we should all develop, that if you think you've experienced growth, significant growth, and it wasn't painful, I think we should all have a red flag saying, did I really grow as much as I thought I did? Is this growth permanent? Because quite frankly, it wasn't very painful, should be an indication that it's just not going to last.
Yeah. So what's an example of growth that you've had personally as you've worked through this program that was painful and that cost you
Yeah,
something?
I'm going to speed up. I know we are running out of time, and I was afraid I would do this. I had too many bullet points. I'm going to speed through and really kind of get down to that swamp. I think there's some good stories that I'll skip over, but you know, this is the challenge that Charlie is forced to deal with every week. And Megan, I didn't have a Megan to edit down my slides and my ideas, so here I am going way over. But let me fast forward through the journey, and then I'll definitely stop at kind of my biggest challenges over the last 4 months. So number one, here we moving forward quickly. We had 2019. Our camp was better than ever. We doubled our profits. We had over 200 players in the gym. Our coaching staff crushed it. You asked about what changes we implemented. Number one was the discipline of daily coaching meetings. Number two was a peer voted coach of the week, coach of the year, and most helpful coach. I always think about Charlie and Megan say, you think nobody notices, but everybody notices. Our coach of the year was a $500 bonus, split by 2 players who actually voted for each other. So if they hadn't have voted for each other, one would have won, but the fact that they voted for each other, they ended up splitting it. And our most helpful coach, our Avenger coach, was a unanimous decision. So out of 30 coaches, they all voted for the same person as the most helpful coach. So I'll always remember that is if you give the peers the power of rewarding each other, they get it right. So to trust your people to see what you're seeing. I couldn't have agreed more with the outcome, and yet I let it be a peer vote. So that was a way that I had implemented some learning into my coaching staff. Moonshot goal. Around the same time, I was challenged with the moonshot goal. I think we've all experienced how challenging the moonshot goal is. I spoke at the Avenger ceremony in 2019, and I stated my moonshot goal was to change youth sports in America. In America, over 70% of kids drop out of youth sports by the age of 13. And I've kind of, to think about how hard moonshot goals are, I said, I want to change that. And then recently I said, you know what? I want to flip that. Instead of 70% of my 13-year-olds quitting, I want 70% of my 13-year-olds not to quit. And then I heard the Charlie Megan voice in my mind saying, 70% sounds like a C. Shouldn't it be 90%? If you want to be an A program, you should really be focused on 90%. So I think very often we have this muscle of saying, if 70% quit, wouldn't it be great if 70% don't quit? And that's not a moonshot. A moonshot is 90%, 95%. Right? Everybody loves their experience so much that they play sports their whole life.
Mackie, what do you think it is that keeps you from going to 90% on your first draft? Why don't we reach high enough?
It's scary. I was talking to Shauna the other day in one of our meetings, and she's talking about how she's implementing a lot of what she's learning and she's thriving. And man, it's so scary because when you do great things, you're expected to continue to do great things. Declare and deliver is terrifying. Right? Mm-hmm. Because the higher the goal, the higher the chance of failure. If I say 70% and I get 60%, I came pretty close. If I say 90% and I get 60%, I failed miserably. So watering down your goals is so common that, but that's not what the moonshot challenge is. The moonshot challenge is to be ambitious.
So does everyone need a Charlie and Megan to push them to go from the 70 to the 90?
Yes, in their own way. Another story that comes to mind, and I've always got very emotional about this. Some of my players who are failing in school, I know who they are, and I check in with them routinely about their report cards, and they'll say, "I'm doing great," and I say, "Well, what does great mean?" And they say mostly B's and C's, and I just kind of lose it, and I go, "That's not great. That's like, I know you failed 2 classes last semester, so no F's is a step forward, but if you define great as B's and C's, you just can't be great. You're not even understanding what greatness is. So let's make the goal all A's. If your goal is all A's and you end up with a couple B's, that's striving for greatness. But thinking that you're succeeding when you're really failing is probably the worst thing we can do as people, is convincing ourselves that we're succeeding when we're not.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna move quick like I promised, but September 2020, AYBL 2.0, and I hate that I have to speed through this because there's some really great stuff. We started identifying real data points to drive success. One story is we identified that the coaching staff was calling out the names, literally the names. So Amy of the best players in our program, and they were never saying the names of the weaker players. And I did a secret data collection where I watched some of my coaches and tallied every time they used a player's name. And at halftime of a game, I pointed out that they were not using everyone's name, and I challenged them to fix it. Now, a kid named Christian was the best player on the court, and he literally had his name called 30 times more than most of the other players on the court. And as a result, everyone passes him the ball, everyone shoots. Simply by using everyone's name in the second half, everybody started passing more. The weaker players started shooting more. Quite frankly, it started looking like real basketball, because in real basketball, everyone on the team needs to touch the ball. And in youth basketball, the best player tends to take 90% of the shots because that's how you win, but it's not good basketball. Simply by saying the name of his teammates got everyone involved, and the quality magically went up 5 or 6 notches. We also started collecting data on our young leaders and identified how to post the scoring. We had 3 data points. We called it cheerleading, detailed instruction, and appropriate discipline. They got a point every time they cheerled one of their teammates, every time they gave detailed instruction to one of their teammates, and every time they appropriately disciplined one of their team members. But they had to use the name while doing so. We posted the results every week, so the young leaders would see who was at the top and who was at the bottom. One of our players named Isaac was at the bottom one week, and I remember going to him and saying, Isaac, I can't believe you ended up at the bottom. I don't see you as someone that would be at the bottom. I think to me, that tells me you're just not trying your hardest, because I think you have the potential to be at the top. The very next week, he was at the top of the list. And it just shows about the power of transparently using data, showing everyone knows who's at the top, everyone knows who's at the bottom. Again, I think that's scary. It's something that I very often avoid. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't want the people at the bottom for it to be public knowledge that they're at the bottom. But by hiding that information, sometimes they don't even know they're at the bottom. They think they're doing great, but they're really failing. And by making that public knowledge, really ignited him to want to change.
Mackie, I'm going to chime in here with a comment of my own, a question, and then tell you it's time to shoot the buzzer beater. My comment is, Charlie said something to me the other day. He said, coddling people tells them you care about them, but you're not very confident in them.
That's right.
And it's when you tell them the truth that you both care about them and you're confident in their potential. That was a huge wake-up call for me. I'm in sales now, right? Like everything is stack ranked, results are visible, everyone knows who's at the top and at the bottom. But being willing to have those conversations, that idea that coddling somebody, not telling them because you care about them so much you don't want to hurt them, coupled with, well, you may care about me, but if you're not confident in me too, then what am I doing? That's what I take away from that. My question for you is, how much do you think your struggle with coaching your adults, coaching your coaches, how many of your bad decisions are motivated by not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings?
Yeah, I think big time. And the way I think about it also, I agree with that in terms of confidence, but I also think about it as, am I coddling them for their benefit because I think they're too weak or too fragile, or am I coddling them for my benefit because I'm too weak or too fragile? Right? Am I avoiding that confrontation for their benefit because I think I'll crush them? It's easy to say that's the reason. If I give them the truth, they can't take it and they'll fall apart, versus I am not comfortable giving them the truth because it's scary for me and it's difficult for me. I think very often when we have weaknesses, it's so easy. Again, we started this conversation before a lot of people showed up, but talking about the victim mentality. And it's like blaming somebody else for your own problems is such a natural thing we do. Well, I'm not honest with my staff because they can't take it, versus I'm not honest with my staff because I am so comfortable in those situations that I avoid them at all costs.
Brilliant. Love that. Thank you. We are starting to lose people. So
yeah, I'm sure we will. But you know what? Charlie and Megan usually go over. So I'm kind of reminding myself that I'll continue to fast forward. February 2020, unfortunately, right before COVID hit, I remember sitting back and saying, we had a packed gym. This is Steady Buckets at its highest level. this is turning into something magical. I was so proud of everything I had learned, everything I had implemented, and then crash. COVID hits. We pivoted quickly into the virtual workouts, but quite frankly, it's just not the same. Every week we started with 100 kids doing our first virtual. It died down every week, and struggling with that. Continuing to struggle with that. But I also pulled off a really remarkable summer camp where we implemented young leaders model, public speaking. We ran, the young leaders ran their own Zoom workouts. It kind of gave birth to the idea of COA Kids Club, which we're still running, and the idea that kids can teach at COA as well as adults. My worst nightmare hit in September when I got a call from the Manhattan DA's office that one of my coaches, one of my long-term coaches, was under investigation for inappropriate text messages with one of our young players. It was, quite frankly, my lowest moment, worst nightmare, and really shook me to the core. It's such a blurry time in my life. I can't remember if it was Charlie or Megan or if it was Amy, one of my other mentors, who said, you know, the worst thing that could come out of this for you personally is if you lost your faith in people. They said, you know, one of your greatest strengths is you see the best in everybody. And if that changes, that would be the thing that hurts our program the most. We handled this situation well with full transparency. Our community is strong. The community supported me. And I think it was Amy, but it may have been Charlie and Megan, or the combination of both. But what really stands out to me is, you know, yes, this was a terrible thing, but what would be really terrible is if it changed you and what we consider your greatest strength, and that is seeing the best in people. Right around the same time, which is why it was such a hard time, my 2-year-old son got diagnosed with autism, or almost 2-year-old son. So the combination of COVID and the situation with my coach under investigation and my child being diagnosed with autism put me in a 4-month C state. I remember thinking, wow, this is what it feels like to be in the C state. I've been hearing about it for so long, but couldn't really feel what that was like. I never really could understand the difference between empathy and sympathy. And immediately, you know, a lot of what I had heard Charlie and Megan talking about really came home. This is empathy. Now I can feel other people's pain. Quite frankly, I've lived a very blessed life. I come from a happy home with in a place where money's not a concern, and I have a loving marriage, and I've had a very blessed life. I have great friends. I've had very little hardship, and this 4-month period was by far the time in my life where I cried the most. I always saw Megan and Charlie crying during presentations and feeling envious that they could be so emotionally expose themselves in such a way. And I was always moved by the power of that vulnerability. And I said, I don't know if I can ever get there. I think it was my first week joining the small group workshop that this was all hitting home. And I remember kind of breaking down and crying in front of a group of people that I had just met. And, you know, while this is really a dark place in my personal life, I also think it was a life-changing event that I learned how to be emotional. I learned how to be vulnerable. I learned how to be honest during my darkest moments. And I hope to keep that honesty as I come out of it. And there's a lot of great things to come in my life, but if I can learn that same power of no lying, hiding, faking throughout the rest of my life, I can look at that 4-month stretch as a blessing versus a curse. Tough to speed through this stuff, but the breakthrough for me was Charlie and Megan very often say, who matters? And something I've always said is, if you don't, when parents have kids that don't want to do anything, I say, well, then volunteer. If you can't help yourself, help other people. And the combination of helping other people and who matters is what really brought me out of my funk. Charlie and Megan encouraged me to work with the people who I thought deserved it the most. I started doing my own small group workshops for my toughness class, my developing toughness in children. So I did a small group workshop with that, and I picked my 3 top players to give them more of my time. I worked with a couple of my coaches who I thought deserved it the most, and I started working with some friends who were trying to start up their own youth organizations and to coach them. I've recently started coaching some of my college teammates who are NCAA head coaches and showing them how to use the developmental GPS. So kind of finding the people that I wanted to help the most and giving them more of my time, and creating a ritual of helping the people that I care most about really brought me out of my funk. And I remember kind of going from what I consider powerless to powerful. I think of the movie Austin Powers, where he loses his mojo. The mojo is actually a liquid. And the way I think about power now, and my personal power, is that it's not an emotion, it's not a feeling, it's an object. It can be given away, it can be taken away. It is my power is always possessed by myself or somebody else. And you have to be very careful with yourself, with your power, because subconsciously you can actually give it to other people. The good news is if you're aware of giving it away, you can actually take it back. And once I realized that I was giving my power away, specifically to experts dealing with my son's autism, and I felt myself kind of in a zombie state, going from speech therapy to OT to ABA and reading and just kind of saying, I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to blindly follow the experts, was me giving away my power. Now, that doesn't mean I can't learn from them as experts, but giving them my power was the worst thing I could do for my son. At the end of the day, myself and my wife are the two most important people in his life. And to say, I don't know anything about autism, therefore I'm going to give my child away to these experts, was me giving away my power. Once I realized that, I was able to take my power back, and everything changed with the way I interacted with him.
Mackie, can I ask you, how do you maintain your power and share your power with a team?
Yeah,
Whether it's the team of people helping Cy or it's the basketball team.
I think the in terms of maintaining it is being aware of it. And maybe not everyone resonates with the idea of a physical object, but now I think of my power as a physical object. And it's either in my pocket, it's either in my possession. And if it's not in my, that's why as a physical object, you're either holding it. I'm either holding the pencil or I'm not. And to me, that means I either possess my own power to make change in my life or I don't. And if I don't, who is holding the power? Who's taken it from me? Who have I given it to? And how can I take it back? And I think the problem with a lot of things when growth stalls is when you're not aware of the problem. I think of giving my power to these experts, but not being aware of doing that. And once I was aware, the amazing thing is once I was aware that I was giving away my power, I was able to take it back. You can't take something back when you don't know you don't have it. Right? If you don't know where it is, you can't find it. Right? So, and to me, that's what the C state is. I think of it as moving, but directionlessly. I think about a leaf blowing in the wind, or a plastic bag blowing in the wind. You're powerless to all the forces around you, and yet you're moving. So you go through life thinking, well, I'm doing the same thing I was done when I felt powerful. I'm waking up at the same time. I'm going to work. In fact, I'm getting a lot done. But are you doing it with power? Or are you doing it just going through the motions? And sometimes people notice that, but very often they don't. And it's funny. I always hear Charlie and Megan say, when you change, the people around you will notice before you do. I think that's true when you change in a positive direction. When you change in a negative direction, I think a lot of people, first of all, they may notice, but they'll be too afraid to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really you that has to notice it, because when other people notice, it's not very helpful. And they, like I said, they might not tell you. But if you can identify when you're in the C state, when you're powerless, when you're a leaf blowing in the wind, that's the first step to coming out of it. Acknowledging that you have lost your power, that you're not the person that you want to be and that you have been in the past, and that you need to make a change to reestablish that feeling of being powerful. So yeah. That's one of my key lessons over the last year that I hope to keep with me my whole life, that I am either powerful or powerless, and there's nothing in between. And I think we sometimes don't know what powerful feels like, but we do know what powerless feels like. So when you feel powerless, stop and figure out where your power is so you can take it back. In terms of applying it to the team, I'm not there yet. I think that's the end of my journey here is continuing to figure out the right disciplines to become better at coaching my staff. I got around the same time, I got back to my wall, back to, we learned about mental GPS. That's all working really well for me. It was almost like, it's funny. It's like I was doing the wall when I didn't need it. When I was thriving, I was doing the wall. And when I was in the swamp and in the C state, I stopped doing the wall. And I think that's very often how the C state works. The thing that will get you out of it is the thing that you stop doing. And that's why it's so harmful. It's like the thing that's holding you back is part of being, using the powerless analogy. It's like you just need to get over one aspect of it. As soon as I started doing my wall again, and I had been doing the wall for over a year before Charlie and Megan presented it at LIP a couple months ago. So I had been doing the wall for a long time, and I knew the value. But I actually moved from New York to New Jersey. It should have been the first thing that I set up. And I was painting bathrooms and reorganizing closets and doing everything except setting up my wall. It should have been the absolute first thing I did when I moved was, okay, nothing else matters. I'm setting up my wall, and that will help me do everything else. But
discipline.
That's the discipline is, and I said it earlier, but I've heard them say it 100 times. You only realize you truly needed the discipline until you need it the most. And unfortunately, I think part of being in the C state is dropping. The first thing you do is you drop the discipline that you weren't even aware that it was that discipline that put you in the A state. And once you enter the C state, you start dropping the things that lead to success, and that just buries you deeper and deeper. So as soon as I started doing my wall again, this was all the same time that I was starting to feel more powerful. Still, I still am failing to embrace the discipline. I'm working on it. It's on my wall. I'm doing a weekly meeting with Amy. We eat our frogs together at 8 a.m. Monday morning. That means we're doing the thing that we want to do the least. And I'm scheduling meetings with my coaches to make sure that I'm working with them on a weekly basis. And I'm taking a ramp up approach. I'm thinking about how I can become better at communicating with them 2% at a time, not making the drastic change that will blow up my relationships, but taking it slowly so that I can, over time, increase my truth giving, increase my ability for them to give me truth, and not just help them develop as coaches, but help them be successful when they ultimately grow out of their role at Steady Buckets and move on to something that they want to do in life, bigger and greater. So much of my journey, it's you hear things that Charlie and Megan say. The idea of our why is to do the little things that make other people help other people do the great things they were meant to do. And you hear that and you go, yeah, that's great. That makes sense. And then it clicks and you go, well, man, that's powerful. Yeah. And man, that's what I want to do. One of the last things I want to share is there's nothing wrong with stealing it. I think sometimes we hear that and we go, well, that's their why. It can't be my why also. That's plagiarism. I can't plagiarize their why, but you can. All right. There's nothing wrong with taking the things that they've spent the last 10, 20 years learning and stealing it. I mean, ruthlessly stealing it. I think about, and this was kind of my last breakthrough I wanted to share, embracing the discipline. And my secret to success is I don't expect things from my players that I don't expect from myself. That's always been something I've always wanted to hold myself accountable. I'm very hard on my players, and I try to be equally hard on myself. The way I like to think about it is, and I've told this to players in my program, if you're not going to listen to me, why do you come here? Why do you come to me? There's hundreds of coaches in New York City. Why do you come to me as a coach if you're not going to take my advice? And I think that's very important for the people in this LIP class. Why do you come to LIP if you're not going to practice the things that you're learning? Why are you wasting your time showing up every Thursday if you're not going to have some blind faith and say, I don't fully understand this, but I'm going to do it anyways? And like I said, there's nothing wrong with stealing. It's not stealing. It's called being coachable, right? Steal it, use it, take what you learn, action it. Don't be a student of leadership, but put it into action. Put it into action immediately.
Be a practitioner, right? Don't be a student, be a player.
But I think one of the things that holds us back, and I know it's held me back in some areas I take their ideas and I run with it. And other ideas I go, well, but that's theirs. It can't be mine also. That's like, I feel like I'm stealing from them. They were gracious enough to share from me. I can't make my why to help the people that I care about do I can't do the little things to help other people do the big things. That's already theirs. But I can take that. I can make that my own. And I can help the people in my life who I care about do the great things they were meant to do. And that goes for all the lessons we're learning here. They're not teaching us this stuff so we can think about it and not use it. They're teaching us this stuff so we can action it, so we can put it into practice. So don't be embarrassed to say, this is where I learned it. Don't be embarrassed to say, I am stealing everything. Because quite frankly, that's what they want us to do. And if you're not doing it, you're wasting their time and you're wasting your own time. So that's it. My last thing is I feel really proud of myself for my no line hiding faking is at an all-time high. I feel very comfortable in my ability to give feedback. Working in my small group workshop, which is now the Leadership Think Tank. Sometimes I give feedback to Mike and I go, Jesus, did I just say that to a 2-star general? Like who am I? But it's really been fantastic. I love the group. I love the honesty that we're able to share with each other. And it's really helped me get to a place where I'm proud of myself. My wife has seen the difference in the way I communicate with her. And I'm really proud of my no lie hiding faking. And I do also know that my discipline continues to need work. The last thing I'll leave you with is I recently wrote an email to Charlie and Megan, coming to grips with my biggest flaw being embracing discipline. And Charlie wrote back, once you fully understand this, you too will fly, little grasshopper. Which I responded, you are the only person who can call me little grasshopper and make me smile. So Charlie and Megan, I know you're going to watch this. So thank you for everything. Thank you for everyone who stuck with me for the last 30 minutes. Sorry for going so far over, but I have a lot to say. I'll make these slides available. I also have plenty more that I wanted to talk about, but this is why I wanted Amy to go first.
Wow.
So anyways, appreciate the time. Thank you for hanging with me. I hope I know how much this means to all of you because you show up every Thursday, and thank you for showing up for me and Amy as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, I love you, Coach Mackey, and I love your honesty and everything that you give. And thanks to everybody else for letting us be here and be ourselves here. Really appreciate all of you. Laura, I think we're back to you. Are we saying goodbye?
That sounds good. Thank you both, Amy and Coach Mackey. A big thanks, Koa. Thank you for sharing your lessons today.
I'm also, I am happy to do Q&A if people, I know Charlie and Megan sometimes stick around. If you gotta go, you gotta go. But if people do have questions, I feel I'm happy to stick around a little longer if people want to pick our brains a little bit. I don't know if you have to run, Amy.
I can do 5 minutes.
Okay, cool. Why don't we do Amy first? I can stick around a little longer if anyone wants to ask Amy for the first 5 minutes, and then I'll stick around for another 5. Maybe unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. I always give at my leadership, my toughness in children class, I give a 5-second shot clock. So if you don't have a question for Amy in 5 seconds, we'll move over to me. And if you don't have a question for me in 5 seconds, we'll end the session. So 5, 4.
I've got a quick question for Amy. It's Ruth here.
Hi, Ruth. So nice to see you.
Yeah, I think it's just now I'm going through the same process with my journey. It's just a piece of advice. I've got a load on there at the moment. How did you well, it's probably to both of you. How did you distill it down? How do you pick out the key bits that you would share within your journey? Because mine is really busy and that's the bit I'm sort of hung up on at the moment.
For me, Ruth, it was, so first of all, I just condensed the timeline. Like I'm just going to do the last year because the last year has been so damn hard.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the memories that still sting are, you know, the low points stood out to me a lot easier than the high points. The memories that sting were the ones that I then just keyed, like, how did I get there? How did I get all the way down there? And who turned me around or helped me get back up?
Okay, that's useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, it was all about just kind of dumping it all on paper.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and then go through. One thing Charlie and Megan always talk about is like, you kind of then start eliminating. So like, what don't you want to share? is usually easier than what you do want to share. So if you have 30 things you want to share and then these 10 are not so interesting or less important. So now I'm down to 20. Now within those 20, you can start looking at what are the most important. So I would say you could probably shrink what you want to share by half. Clearly, I didn't do a great job with that because I had way too much to share. But you can start by just crossing out as much as possible, then going back in and circling as much as possible and say these are the things that definitely want to go in, and then you're left with a much smaller list of now I'm down to 10 things that maybe I'll pick 2 or 3 of them, and that's much more manageable.
Yeah, because I've only got 30 minutes with Duncan next week, so that's the bit that's on my mind. But it's useful to see both of yours as well, and thank you for sharing. It's been eye-opening.
Here for you, Ruth, if you want to talk through it ahead of time. Just
thank you, Amy. Thank you. Thank you.
Amy and Mackie.
Yes.
This is Brian. Just one quick question. Actually, I'm going to jump to the small group here that's starting in a moment with Taryn and Kevin. But on that skunkworks approach, and I think picks up what you just asked, Ruth, what you shared with us today, Amy and Mackie, is that did you distill it as you're sharing with your companies, right? So whether that's Fidelity or your company, your group, Mackie, and I know it's just a start, like Ruth, you said, right? We're thinking skunkworks. How much of this plays right into what you shared already, or what you're thinking to share as you build the group at your organizations?
So I've already shared this with everyone who works for me, and I actually forwarded it to my boss this morning, and in our one-on-one tomorrow, we're going to talk through it. So he's going to see on there, oh, you were really frustrated with me. So I just consider the group that I work with my lab, and I feel pretty comfortable sharing this very directly and very transparently. Now, am I blasting it out to 50,000 employees at Fidelity? No. But those who are entrusted into my care to develop them as leaders, and those who are developing me as a leader, that is the zone that I'm sharing in.
Yeah, so I'm different. I'm sharing, my skunkwork project is sharing with a group of friends of mine who are Division III head coaches. I will share some of this with them, but quite frankly, I think they're less interested in my personal growth as they are in how they can use what I'm learning to benefit themselves. So I think, one thing that I always stands out to me is who matters. Who are you talking to, right? And this is more of a presentation I would give to my coaches at Steady Buckets versus the group I'm working with now, our head coaches at the college level. And I'll pick out a couple key points, but again, they'll be less interested in my personal journey and more interested in, hey, I have the real pleasure and opportunity to work with this fantastic group of people. I'm learning a lot, and I'm going to really quickly teach you what I'm learning so you can implement it immediately. So that communication's a little different than people that I think being vulnerable in front of my staff is different than being vulnerable in front of a group of people that don't work for me.
All right, I have to drop everybody. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I absolutely love this community.
Yeah, thank you both. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. And I do have time to stick around. So if anyone has another question, if I don't get one quickly, I'll do the 5-second shot clock, and then we'll see how that works. Yeah. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, well, thank you all for sticking around. I'll pass it back to Laura. And like Amy said, I love this community. Most of us have never met, but I think we all feel like family in a big way because we share this passion for what Charlie and Megan bring, for what Next Jump is all about, and for all going through the similar struggles of growing and developing and taking on this most difficult challenge of life of becoming a better me. So thank you, everyone.